What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 2, buy low trade targets. This is probably my favorite video each week, since trading is one of the most interesting aspects of fantasy football because the public's perception on players changes so much after just 1 week of football that we can often capitalize on recency bias and identify players that are due for big weeks. This season, I've developed a trade model for the website. It looks at each player's involvement and identifies players who over or underperformed expectations every week. It's a machine learning model, so there's no human bias involved. It instead looks at what happened, compared it to what it thinks should have happened, and then spits out players that you should be trading for and away. I'm not going to go over every player on it because there are a ton and you guys don't like long videos. But if you want to see the full results, you can check it out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But let's start things off with George Kittle. Now, Kittle finished near the top of this week's buy low results after posting an 8 reception, 54-yard stat line on 10 targets. And if you watch the game, then he actually had multiple touchdowns called back due to penalties. And these weren't like offensive pass interference or he stepped out of bounds then came back in the end zone. No, these had nothing to do with him. He could have easily had, 10 for 80 and 2 touchdowns, and then the narrative is completely different than 8 for 54. We all know how good Kittle is, so I'm not going to sit here and try and sell him to you. He's a top 2 tight end this season, and it's possible that right now he's at his cheapest cost in the trade market. So if you need an upgrade at tight end and the team that has Kittle is lacking at running back or lacking at wide receiver and you are deep at that position, try and get him. Davante Adams is next, and the Packers actually ran the 7th fewest plays in week 1 after facing the Bears on the road. Because of the difficult matchup, Adams was only able to produce 4 receptions for 36 yards on 8 targets and just 63 air yards, which ranked outside the top 50. This was a massive disappointment given that he played fine against the Bears last year, even having a really nice game, and this would have actually been his worst game of all of last season. I mean, his worst game last year was like 6 for 40 and a touchdown. This was well below that. I'd be a little bit surprised if you could actually get him at a big discount. Everyone knows the name and everyone knows the Bears are an elite defense. So no one that owned him is going into this week like, man, maybe Adams isn't part of their game plan. No, everyone knows how good he is. Everyone knows how good the Bears are. But I'm sure there are a few Adams owners out there who would let him go for a little bit less than his market value. So if you think your team is just an elite wide receiver away from a championship roster, then now is probably the time to try and go after Adams if you think you can. Because he's Davante Adams, he's gonna produce much more than he did this week. Donte Moncrief is next, and believe it or not, he has the top ranking in this week's buy low model. That's not to say he's any good, because the model evaluates volume and not talent. But it's an indication that the public is going to devalue him more than any other player. He had 10 targets and 92 air yards, yet converted that into just 3 receptions for 7 yards. It's incredible how bad that is. Now, even though he takes the top spot this week, we need to add in our own knowledge to the model. They played the Patriots, who have Gilmore as a shutdown corner. We can expect Juju to see more work when he faces basically any other team. That's going to come at the expense of Moncrief's targets. With that being said, Ben also went 27 for 47 for 276 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. So we can also expect him to increase his production moving forward. You're not going out and just trading for Moncrief everywhere. But I can bet you there are plenty of leagues out there where he'll be dropped for McLaurin or Ross or Brown, or his owners will give him up for next to nothing. So since he's virtually free and just received a lot of volume in a difficult matchup, he's someone you should find a way to get on your team because he should have had a lot more fantasy points than he did. Mike Evans is next, and Evans was reportedly recovering from an illness heading into Sunday. That's always a really difficult situation for fantasy. There are times when it means nothing, and yet there are times when a player just looks gassed all day. We can't know exactly how much it affected him, but I'd guess it had an impact, but that Winston was the main reason for his performance. Winston looked lost against the 49ers' improved defense, which we predicted they would be, so I guess yay for us. But even though the 49ers are better than most people think, they're not elite. So Winston is going to need to play better than that. We still like the Bucs for the exact same reasons as before. Their defense is trash, so they're gonna have to throw the football. And since they do have a consolidated target share, even if it doesn't look that way after week 1, we want to target the guys we know are gonna be involved. Winston only completed 20 passes on 36 attempts, which is one of his lower outputs on 35 plus attempts in his career. And part of the reason for that is coaching staffs. I talk a lot about smart coaching staffs, targeting players who are on smart teams, and how teams can exceed expectations when they get the most out of their players. The two teams I've highlighted the most when talking about this are the Ravens and the 49ers. Both of these teams are very well coached, so they're going to exceed expectations, especially when they have time to prepare. So it's not shocking that the Bucs didn't play well after facing an improved defense on a very well coached team. Jump to this week. Well, no one has time to prepare for a Thursday night game, so it's a nice spot to see a bounce back from the Bucs offense. So I'd be looking to get Evans this week before his owners remember how good he is. Let's talk about a running back now, and we'll go with James Conner. Now, Conner had a fairly mediocre stat line, 10 carries for 21 yards on the ground, 4 receptions for 44 yards through the air. But after watching the game, it's pretty clear that Conner is the lead back, and he's going to have a large role in the passing game. They just got stomped by the Patriots. It's gonna happen. You're gonna have weeks where your player's team just gets annihilated and they don't do anything. This happened to be one of those weeks for Steelers players, and so their volume is a little bit different than we'd normally expect. Next week, he plays Seattle at home, which is kind of a mixed bag for me. It's great that he's home. We know Steelers at home is obviously an upgrade for Big Ben, which means it's an upgrade for the offense as a whole, but they barely run any plays, talking about the Seahawks here. So it's entirely possible that we see a second straight week where the play volume, especially the touch volume for James Conner, being a lot lower than we would normally expect. I mean, they ran less than 50 plays last week, and that's something they want to do. They want to just run the football and just drain the clock, and that's terrible for the production of your opposing fantasy players. So if you can get him this week at a really nice discount, then go for it. But honestly, it's not a terrible situation to offer some trades that you know might be a tad bit unfair, but that maybe still help out the other team. If this dude that you're trading for that has James Conner needs a wide receiver, we'll offer him a trade that's a little bit more in your favor, and he probably knows that and is going to reject it, but get his mind thinking about getting rid of Conner for a wide receiver. Then we go into next week, where he's very likely to see less volume than we expect, and if he has another bad performance, well, you're going to be the first person in his mind, and he's going to be thinking about that trade for wide receiver. So even though you might not be able to get the trade done this week, if you can start trade talks right now, it's going to help you next week if it happens to go like we might expect. Christian Kirk, back to wide receiver. He finished second in this week's buy low model, and there's actually a decent gap between him and third place. He saw 12 targets and 139 air yards, yet that only translated into 4 receptions for 32 yards. This game actually played out a lot like we expected it would. They didn't run their actual offense this preseason, and this was the first time many of those players ran the air raid. So I was expecting them to maybe start out a little bit slow, as many teams implementing the system have done over the years. But then things seemed to click, and the offense looked a lot better down the stretch. Kyler Murray finished with 54 pass attempts, and the Cardinals do in fact rank first in the league in plays run after 1 week. Now, that's due to the overtime period. They would not have finished that high if they didn't go to overtime, but they still would have finished in the top 10, even without the overtime, and they were playing one of the slowest paced teams in the league in a game where they only managed 4 plays per drive in the first half before finally managing 7 plays per drive in the second half when things started to click. So what does that mean for Kirk? Well, he greatly underperformed the volume he was given, and we can expect similar volume moving forward. He's not going to average 12 targets per week, but realistically, he'll be close. Fitz had 13, Keyshawn Johnson had 10, Damiere Byrd had 7, David Johnson had 7. They're going to throw the ball so many times that Kirk can sustain this sort of volume moving forward. So I would be trading for Kirk, but it's another situation similar to James Conner. He plays the Ravens this week, so it's possible that his cheapest point is heading into week 3. So if you can start trade talks now, maybe if he underperforms again, you can grab him next week. But I would still be willing to finalize a trade before this week because he very much underperformed what he will do on average. Back to running back with David Montgomery, and people are going to panic, I promise. Especially since everybody watched the Thursday night football games. The first game, everyone watched it. Montgomery played on just 38% of snaps, was given 6 carries and just 1 target, while the Bears looked terrible at home on offense. But here's the thing about rookie running backs. They typically don't play much to start the season. So any usage is exciting. Take Jordan Howard. In his rookie season a few years ago, he finished with 252 carries and 50 targets. That's exactly what we want from Montgomery, right? Because I said if he gets a little bit less than that, then he'll be well worth his ADP. Well, Howard didn't play in week 1, then had 3 carries and 2 targets in week 2, then 9 carries and 6 targets in week 3, before finishing with 15 or more carries in 11 of his last 13 games. There are plenty of cases where rookie running backs don't see a lot of volume right out of the gate, but then they get eased into the lead back role by mid-season. And it's not like Mike Davis did a whole lot to hold off David Montgomery. Some people might also look at this situation and be concerned with Cohen. He had some usage through the air, right? That's going to limit David Montgomery's receiving yards. No, Cohen was their slot receiver on Thursday. He was not a running back. Mike Davis and David Montgomery played nearly every single running back snap. David Montgomery is absolutely someone you should be looking to trade for because people are going to panic and think that this is Royce Freeman all over again. It's not. His touches will increase. The offense isn't going to look lost. And so this right now is the best time to trade for him. Curtis Samuel, last player we're going to talk about, was in on 93% of snaps, although he was only given 4 targets, catching 3 for 32 yards with no carries. That was something that we were hoping to give him 1 to 2 carries maybe a week, mixing in some trick plays, doing some end arounds. It was something he was good at last season and adds to his fantasy value. None this week, but we can expect some moving forward. This was a bad game for Cam Newton, who's been known to lay a goose egg from time to time. Next week, the Panthers take on the Bucs at home in the Thursday night matchup. If Samuel were to have another bad game, say he posts another 3 for 35 game, then I'd start to get a little bit concerned. But I'm not buying his lack of production. It's still a consolidated target share. Maybe Greg Olsen had a little bit more usage than we expected, but Newton had a very bad game. And the Rams aren't exactly pushovers on defense. He's still a very talented young wide receiver, and he's going to be in there on nearly every snap. So he's absolutely a buy in my eyes. Not a player you need to trade for, but definitely a player to keep an eye out if you need an upgrade at wide receiver. If that team's willing to give him away for a lot cheaper than he's worth, go for it. All right, that does it for the week 2 buy low targets. Again, if you want to see a bigger list of players to buy low on, then check them out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And tomorrow will be players to sell high on. But that, my friends, is the end of this video. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.